Greetings and welcome to this photo build of Tamiya's P38G Lightning, Miss Virginia. I pre-ordered this kit as soon as I was able to and started building it the day it was released. I chose to build this kit up as Miss Virginia, one of two P38s credited with shooting down Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. If there's one thing I can say about this kit before getting into the build, it's that every bit of praise and every accolade that this kit has received is absolutely well earned. The kit is packaged like any other Tamiya kit. No space is left unused. One of the nice things that I liked about it is that the painting guide could also double as a poster. Construction begins in the cockpit. One of the things that I liked about this was the fact that each piece fits snugly into the next. You can almost build up the entire cockpit without ever having to use glue. Based on my references, it seemed rather accurate and was extremely well detailed. I only decided to add some bits of wiring and cabling using my standard of fluoro wire. I decided to pay special attention to the radio stack since it would be very visible in the rather open cockpit. Painting in the cockpit was rather straightforward. I painted the majority of it interior green and used black and silver and gray to pick out some of the details. My references showed that the seat and the armor behind the seat were a darker shade of green, and so these were painted appropriately. The instrument panel was a decal, and it fit perfectly and looks really convincing. Dry fitting is an essential tool for all modelers. Here I've dry fit most of the cockpit components into the upper fuselage. Interestingly enough, at this point I hadn't used any glue. Everything just fits so perfectly. You can also see here just how open this cockpit is and how much you will see. You'll also notice what appears to be a large hole in the floor of the cockpit. This is actually where the upper wheel well fits into the bottom of the fuselage. Next up in the construction are the wheel wells and some of the other interior bits. Just like the cockpit, these parts all fit together snugly and require very little glue, and look really convincing under a coat of paint. I based these with black, using Mr. Surfacer 1500 out of a spray can. Black, in my opinion, is a superior undercoat color when doing metallics, and these were painted with Vallejo's metallic aluminum. With the cockpit and wheel well done, I was able to close the upper and lower fuselage joints. This is where I ran into my first and only issue with this kit. There was a rather noticeable gap at the wing root on the left-hand side that needed attention. I primed this whole area black, masked off some of the important detail, and went to work sanding and cleaning up this seam. It really didn't take that much work, but in all honesty, this was the only issue with the kit and the only place that I really had to clean up a seam. The opposite side was not nearly as bad and just required a few swipes of sandpaper and it was gone. Moving on to the main landing gear wheel wells. These areas have a lot of parts and require a very specific order of operations when assembling them. However, once they are assembled, they look amazing and are extremely detailed. Here I've prepped the superchargers for paint. At this point I was ready to mask up the cockpit. Tamiya provides painting masks, however they are not pre-cut, you must cut them out. I did find that once they were cut out, and if you cut them out carefully, they fit absolutely perfectly. You'll also notice that I haven't masked off the center portion of the canopy. That's because I was deciding to build this one with an open canopy, and Tamiya actually provides 3 different options. You can do a fully enclosed canopy, and 2 options for open canopy depending on whether you're building the F or the G model. Since I wasn't going to be using the closed canopy, I decided to use that as part of the mask. I also went ahead and pre-painted the interiors of the radiators and the oil coolers as well, since they would be difficult to get to once the assembly was all done. For this build, I wanted to use the black basing technique. The basic idea of this is you start with a black base, add color modulation, and then your base colors over that. The concept behind this process is to allow your main colors to have a faded, worn, and patchy look to them. So for my modulation, I used white, and I sprayed it really thin at a low pressure and just gave it a patchy effect all over the body. I also paid special attention to the upper surface right behind the exhaust, where the main paint would have been faded from the exhaust. Here I have applied the base coat to the bottom side of the airplane. For this I used Ammo by MIG Neutral Gray. I sprayed really thin coats so that some of that modulation and some of the black base would show through. Here in this close-up shot, you can kind of see some of that patchy effect showing through. In this next shot, you can see that I'm using poster tack to create a demarcation between the neutral gray color and eventually the olive drab color going on top. Here the model is prepped for painting the upper surface. You can see that I've used blue painter's tape to help control overspray. For the upper surface, I used Ammo by MiG olive drab. This I again applied in thin layers so that some of that modulation and black base could show through. One of the unique things about Miss Virginia and other P-38s of the time is that when they were shipped from the United States, all of the important panel lines around the nose and the engine and the cockpit were taped off and covered in some kind of dope. This results in some interesting lines that you can see on the actual aircraft, such as in this picture. So I wanted to replicate that. I used very thin Tamiya masking tape and masked off some of the lines, and then oversprayed it with a darker variation of my olive drab base. And here you can see the results once the masking tape has been removed. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with it. Aircraft operating in the Pacific Theater were often subjected to some very harsh environments. I wanted to replicate this and add a lot of paint chipping to the upper surface of the wing where the pilots and the crew chiefs would have been walking. Here I've done this using a very fine brush and Vallejo's metallic aluminum. I always consider it a milestone when I can get the airplane up on its wheels for the first time, even if just for a dry fit. It still makes me happy. One of the many unique things that I learned during my research of this airplane is that on the mission to shoot down Admiral Yamamoto, they actually used two different types of drop tanks because they needed extra range than they would normally use. So they had one of the larger ferrying tanks as well as one of the standard drop tanks. So here you can see both tanks painted up along with some of the other smaller pieces. After a gloss coat, it was time to do the decals. Historically, Tamiya decals can be rather thick, but I found these ones were actually quite the opposite. They reacted well to my solvaset, and they were in great register and perfect color. I had no issues with them. With the decals on, I could finally give it a matte coat and remove the masking. It's starting to look like a proper P-38. All that's left to do is add some of the smaller detail bits, and then we're done. Although the 339th Fighter Squadron officially carried out the mission, 10 of the 18 pilots were drawn from the other two squadrons of the 347th Group. The commander selected 4 pilots to be designated as the killer flight: Captain Thomas G. Lanphier, Jr., Lieutenant Rex T. Barber flying Miss Virginia, Lieutenant Jim McLanahan, and Lieutenant Joe Moore. Mitchell and his force arrived at the intercept point 1 minute early at 9:34 a.m., just as Yamamoto's aircraft descended into view in a light haze. The P-38s jettisoned their auxiliary tanks, turned to the right to parallel the bombers, and began a full-power climb to intercept them. Mitchell radioed Lanphier and Barber to engage, and they climbed toward the 8 aircraft. The nearest escort fighters dropped their own tanks and dived toward the pair of P-38s. Lanphier, in a sound tactical move, immediately turned head-on and climbed towards the escorts, while Barber chased the diving bomber transports. Barber banked steeply to turn in behind the bombers and momentarily lost sight of them, but when he regained contact, he was immediately behind one and began firing into its right engine, rear fuselage, and empennage. When Barber hit its left engine, the bomber began to trail heavy black smoke. The Betty rolled violently to the left, and Barber narrowly avoided a mid-air collision. Looking back, he saw a column of black smoke and assumed the Betty had crashed into the jungle. Barber headed towards the coast at treetop level, searching for the second bomber, not knowing which one carried the targeted high-ranking officer. Captain Lanphier successfully dispatched the second Betty. The death of Admiral Yamamoto raised morale in the United States and shocked the Japanese, who were officially told about the incident on May 21, 1943. In the United States, in order to cover up the fact that the Allies were reading Japanese codes, American news agencies were given the same cover story used to brief the 339th Fighter Squadron, that civilian coast watchers in the Solomons observed Yamamoto boarding a bomber and relayed the information by radio to American naval forces in the immediate area. This convinced the Japanese military that it was only through a stroke of luck that the Americans carried out the successful attack. This kit was an absolute joy to build, and I foresee building many more in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below. I try to read them and respond to them as quickly as I can. I am currently taking commissions, so if you're interested or would like more information, please reach out to me at hammerheadmodelmaking@gmail.com. And as always, thank you, and we'll see you for the next time.